You know, it's funny the things you remember when your world is about to fall apart. It's never the big, dramatic moments, not at first. It's the little things. For me, it was the scent of rosemary and thyme from the roast chicken I'd just pulled out of the oven. It was the way the late afternoon sun slanted through the dining room window, making the dust motes dance over the table I'd set with my mother's wedding china. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it had been for the last 15 years of Sunday dinners. It was the last perfect Sunday. And I had no idea. My daughter, Jess, and her husband, Mark, were due any minute. I fussed with the silverware, aligning the forks just so. My late husband, Robert, used to laugh at me for it. "Carolyn," he'd say, "they're here for your cooking, not for a military inspection." I missed that laugh. God, I missed it every single day. After he passed, these Sunday dinners were the one thing that kept me tethered to the world, the one ritual that made this big, quiet house feel a little less empty. I thought that after Robert was gone, Jess and I would become closer. How naive I was. Instead, it felt like an invisible wall had gone up between us. One, her husband, Mark, had built brick by brick. The sound of their car pulling into the driveway broke my thoughts. I put on my best smile, the one all mothers have, the one that says, everything is fine, even when your heart feels like a lead weight in your chest. Mark walked in first, all expensive cologne and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He gave me a perfunctory air kiss near my cheek. "Carolyn," he said, his eyes already scanning the room, "place looks great. A little dated, but great." Jess followed behind him, and my heart did its familiar little ache. She was beautiful, my daughter. She had Robert's eyes, but she looked tired, drained. She gave me a quick, tight hug. "Smells good, Mom." There was no warmth in it. It was the same tone she'd used to compliment a stranger. Dinner was quiet. The kind of quiet that's so loud it hurts. I tried to fill the silence, talking about my garden, about a book I was reading. They offered one-word answers, their attention mostly on their phones. Mark, a financial advisor, was always closing a deal or monitoring the market. Jess just scrolled, a blank expression on her face. Then, Mark looked up from his plate of barely touched chicken and gestured around the dining room with his fork. "You know," he said casually, "I was talking to a client the other day. His mother was in a similar-sized house. She finally decided to sell, moved into a luxury condo. Best decision she ever made. The amount of equity she unlocked was life-changing for her kids." I just nodded, unsure how to respond. It felt like such an odd, clinical thing to say. But then he added the line that, looking back, was the key that unlocked everything. He leaned back in Robert's chair, looking so smugly out of place, and said, "It's just inefficient, you know? All this space, all this equity tied up. At a certain point, a house stops being a home and starts being a dormant asset. It's a parent's duty to make sure that asset is working for the next generation." My blood ran cold. A dormant asset. That's what he called this house. The house where I brought my baby girl home from the hospital, where we marked her height on the doorframe in the kitchen, where I held my husband's hand as he took his last breath. An asset. I looked at Jess, waiting for her to say something, to defend the sanctity of our home, our memories. She just kept her eyes on her plate, refusing to look at me. And in her silence, I heard an answer louder than any words she could have spoken. They left early, claiming they had a busy week ahead. I stood at the door and waved as their Lexus disappeared down the street, the perfect image of a happy suburban family. The smile on my face felt like a cheap mask. As I was about to close the door, I heard their voices carry on the crisp autumn air from the end of the driveway, where they must have stopped. The windows were down. It was Mark's voice, sharp and impatient. "Not sustainable, Jess. We've been over this." And then my daughter's reply, so faint I almost missed it. "I know, but it's her home." Mark's voice was like ice. "It's for her own good. Stop being so sentimental." The car pulled away. I closed the door, my hand trembling as I leaned against it. For her own good. The words echoed in the sudden deafening silence of my house. I didn't know what they meant. Not exactly. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life was about to change forever, and not for the better. I stood there, leaning against the solid oak of my front door for what felt like an eternity. The words, "Stop being so sentimental," echoing in the hallway. My first instinct, the one that's been programmed into every mother since the dawn of time, was to make excuses for them. For her. They must have been talking about something else, I told myself. A friend's problem. A situation at Mark's work. It had to be. Because the alternative, that my daughter and her husband were discussing me like I was a problem to be managed, a piece of old furniture to be dealt with, that was simply too monstrous to consider. I walked back into the dining room on autopilot. The scene that had looked so warm and perfect an hour before now felt like an archaeological dig of a failed evening. Half-eaten plates of lovingly prepared food were growing cold. A napkin, stained with Jess's Merlot-colored lipstick, lay crumpled by her plate. It looked like a wound. I started clearing the dishes, the clinking of my mother's china sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. It felt like I was trying to tidy up a crime scene. As I scraped the expensive food into the trash, Mark's words came back to me, slithering into my thoughts. A dormant asset. Not a home. An asset. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in the bed I had shared with Robert for 45 years, staring up at the familiar shadows on the ceiling. Every creak of the old house, sounds that had once been a comfort, now sounded menacing. I kept replaying the evening, connecting the dots I had tried so hard to ignore. Mark's comment about his client's mother, the way Jess wouldn't meet my eye, and finally, the chilling conversation in the driveway. It wasn't about a friend. I knew it. I knew it with the kind of deep, marrow-deep certainty that you can't argue with. They were talking about me and my home. By morning, I knew I couldn't let it lie. The anxiety was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest. I needed to hear my daughter's voice. I needed her to say something, anything, to make it all go away. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over her picture. I pressed call. It rang twice, then went to her voicemail. The chipper, recorded greeting felt like a mockery. "Hi, you've reached Jess and Mark. We can't get to the phone right now." Jess and Mark, a team, a united front. I swallowed the lump in my throat and left a message, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just calling to say it was lovely having you both over last night. Give me a call when you get a free minute. Love you." I waited. I watered my African violets, Robert's favorites. I tidied rooms that were already tidy. I watched the clock. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. My heart leaped. But it wasn't a call. It was a text. "Hey, Mom. Glad you enjoyed it. Super busy week for us. Talk later." That was it. No, love you too. No call back. Just a cold, dismissive little message. The use of us felt deliberate, reinforcing the wall he had built between us. The facade of our relationship, already fragile, was starting to show serious cracks. The rest of the week was more of the same. A coordinated, suffocating silence. My follow-up text asking about her Wednesday coffee break, our standing weekly date for the last 5 years, went unanswered for hours until a terse reply finally came through. "Sorry, can't make it. Swamped." No offer to reschedule. No explanation. It was a deliberate cancellation of the one piece of our routine that was just for us. It was a clear signal. I was being frozen out, handled, kept at a distance. The warmth and easy affection we once shared had been replaced by the sterile efficiency of a corporate memo. By Friday, the anxiety had morphed into a cold, heavy dread. The question was no longer if something was wrong, but what they were planning. That text message about our coffee date confirmed it. This wasn't just a busy week, it was a strategy. They were preparing for something, getting their stories straight before they came to me with whatever it was. And my gut, the one that had guided me through 45 years of marriage and 35 years of motherhood, told me I was the target of their hostile takeover. I just had to wait for them to make their move. And I didn't have to wait long. I didn't have to wait long at all. The very next Tuesday, just as I was getting ready to repot some geraniums, I saw Mark's black Lexus pull into my driveway. My stomach twisted into a knot. A Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. This wasn't a social call. This was it. This was the ambush. I opened the door before they had a chance to ring the bell. I was determined not to be caught off guard, to at least face this on my own 2 feet. "Jess, Mark, what a surprise," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. "Hi, Mom," Jess said, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. She brushed past me into the house. Mark followed, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. He was the one who looked me in the eye. "Carolyn," he said with that practiced, placid smile, "we need to talk. Can we sit down?" They walked into my living room and sat on my sofa, the one Robert and I had picked out together 30 years ago, as if they were a parole board and I was the inmate up for review. The air was thick with a cloying, false sense of gravity. I remained standing. "Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." It was a reflex, the simple act of a hostess. "No, thank you," Mark said, waving a dismissive hand. "We won't be long. This is a conversation we probably should have had a while ago." He looked at Jess, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze still firmly planted on the Persian rug. He took that as his cue. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together in that sincere, "I'm about to sell you something you don't want" way of his. "Carolyn," he began, his voice dripping with condescension masked as concern, "Jess and I are worried about you. We've been worried for some time now." I just stared at him, my silence a blank wall he could throw his words against. "This house," he continued, gesturing around the room, "it's a lot for one person. The yard work, the property taxes, the constant upkeep. We saw that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom last month. These things start to add up. It's a burden, and we don't want you to carry it alone anymore." I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. He was twisting reality, turning my home into a list of liabilities, turning my independence into a flaw. "So," he said, reaching for his briefcase, "Jess and I have been proactive. We've done some research, and we've found the perfect solution." He pulled out a glossy, trifold brochure and slid it onto the coffee table. The cover showed smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard, the Willows at Pine Lake, a premier retirement community. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was real. This was actually happening. "Mark," I started, but he held up a hand to silence me. "Hear me out, Carolyn. It has 3 pools, a golf course, organized social events, and a 24/7 nursing staff on site. You'll be safe. You'll have company your own age. You won't have to worry about a thing." He was beaming, as if he'd just gifted me a winning lottery ticket. I couldn't look at the brochure. I couldn't look at him. I turned to my daughter, my only child. "Jess," I whispered, my voice cracking. "What is this?" For the first time, she looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a miserable cocktail of guilt and resolve. "Mom, we toured it last week. It's really nice," she mumbled, before her eyes darted away again. Last week. The week of silence. The week she'd been too swamped to get coffee with her mother. She'd been touring facilities to put me in. The betrayal was so sharp, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. But the final nail in the coffin, the true purpose of their visit, was yet to come. "And the best part," Mark said, his voice swelling with pride at his own cleverness, "is that you won't have to worry about selling the house. We want to keep this asset in the family, of course. It makes the most sense financially. Jess and I will be moving in at the end of next month." There it was again. Asset. They weren't just putting me out, they were replacing me. They were going to live in my home, sleep in my bedroom, cook in my kitchen. They were going to take my life. I finally found my voice. It was a threadbare whisper, but it was mine. "But this is my home." Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of impatience. The mask was slipping. "This is what's happening, Carolyn," he said, his tone no longer gentle, but firm and final. "It's already decided. We're here today to discuss the timeline. We've already had the paperwork drawn up." For a moment, after Mark said, "It's already decided," the world went quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and panic. I tried to argue, to plead. I talked about Robert, about the promises we'd made to each other in this very room. I talked about Jess's childhood, about the memories soaked into the very floorboards. It was like talking to a brick wall. A smiling, well-dressed brick wall. Mark deflected every emotional appeal with chilling corporate platitudes. We understand this is a transition, Carolyn, but you have to look at the long-term benefits. Emotion isn't going to help us with the logistics here. And Jess just sat there, a ghost at her own mother's execution. She twisted the strap of her purse, her knuckles white, refusing to meet my pleading gaze. They left the glossy brochure for The Willows on my coffee table. It lay there like an obituary for a life that wasn't over yet. They left, and I was left alone in the echoing silence of a house that had just been reclassified as an asset. The next few days were a gray, formless blur. I'd wake up, walk through the rooms of my home, and feel like an intruder. It was as if their words had poisoned the very air, turning a place of comfort into a holding cell. On Thursday, a stack of flattened moving boxes appeared on my porch. There was a note attached, written in Jess's neat, familiar handwriting. "Mom, thought these might help get things started. Let me know when is a good time for me to come help you sort." A smiley face. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer detachment, took my breath away. She was treating the dismantling of my life like a weekend chore she had to get through. She didn't wait for my reply. She showed up that Saturday morning, wearing yoga pants and a determinedly cheerful expression. She was armed with a roll of packing tape and a black marker. "Okay, Mom," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "Let's make this easy. We'll do 3 piles: keep, donate, and storage." She started in the living room. She picked up a framed photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, smiling and impossibly young. "This old frame is pretty chipped," she noted clinically. "We can get all these scanned for you. You can have a nice little digital frame at the Willows. It'll save space." She didn't understand. She didn't want to understand. The chipped frame was part of the story. She moved to the bookshelves, her eyes scanning the titles of Robert's beloved history collection. "Dad read all of these?" she asked, pulling one out. "Wow. I don't think you'll have room for all this. We can donate them to the library." "No," I said, my voice sharp, surprising both of us. "You will not touch your father's books." She recoiled slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before being replaced by that mask of placid concern. "Okay, Mom. Okay. Just a suggestion." We moved to my bedroom, and that's where it happened. The moment the last thread of hope I had for my daughter finally snapped. While I was folding sweaters, she wandered over to my dresser. On it sat a small cherrywood jewelry box. It was nothing fancy, but it was my most prized possession. Inside was my wedding band, which I now kept safe since my fingers had gotten too thin. There was a simple pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, and nestled in the velvet was a delicate, worn silver locket that had belonged to my mother. It held tiny, faded pictures of my parents. It was my entire history, my connection to love and to loss, all in one small box. Jess picked it up. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice soft and syrupy. "We can't risk this getting lost in the move. And the rooms at the new place, you know, they're not that secure. People come and go." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Jess, no, please, that stays with me." She gave me a sad, pitying little smile, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand what's good for them. "I know, Mom, and that's why we need to keep it safe for you. It's too valuable to risk." Before I could move, before I could even find the words to scream, she slipped the entire jewelry box into her large leather tote bag. She zipped it shut. The sound of that zipper was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a lock turning, a final, definitive click. She patted her bag. "There. It'll go right into our safe deposit box on Monday. You won't have to worry about it for a second." She kissed me on the cheek, a cold, dry press of lips, and said she had to run, but she'd be back next week to continue packing. Then she was gone. I stood frozen in the middle of my bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes and piles of my life. She had just walked out of my house with my wedding band, with my mother's locket, with my most sacred memories. She hadn't stolen them for their monetary value. She had stolen them to prove that I no longer had control over anything, not even my own past. In that moment, watching my daughter's car pull away with my entire history zipped up in her purse, the part of me that was a grieving widow, the part that was a soft, accommodating mother, simply burned away. And in its place, something I hadn't felt in years began to stir. It wasn't sadness, it was a cold, quiet, and utterly unflinching rage. My first move was one of pure defiance. I walked into the living room, picked up the neat stack of flattened boxes Jess had left by the door, and carried them out to the recycling bin. I went back inside and began to undo her work. I took Robert's history books out of the donate box, the scent of old paper and leather filling the air, and placed each one back on its shelf. I retrieved the chipped wedding photo from the pile of frames she deemed unworthy and set it back in its rightful place on the mantel. This wasn't just my house. It was my territory, and an invasion had just been repelled. But that night, after the fire of my anger had cooled to embers, something else took its place, a cold, heavy stone of introspection. I was in the bathroom, getting ready for bed, when I caught my own reflection in the mirror. I saw the tired lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair, and I asked the woman staring back at me a question that had been buried for years. How did we get here? It was so easy to blame Mark. He was a predator, a charismatic narcissist who had sunk his teeth into my daughter. And it was easy to blame Jess for being so weak, for allowing him to poison her mind against her own mother. I could have spent the rest of my life marinating in that righteous anger. But looking into my own eyes, I had to ask the harder question. What was my part in it? The thought was a betrayal to my own sense of victimhood, but it was honest. Had I raised a daughter so desperate for a man's approval that she would throw her own mother away to keep him? I thought about all the years I'd prioritized her happiness above all else, rushing to solve every problem, to soothe every hurt. I wanted to give her the world, but in doing so, had I forgotten to teach her that she couldn't take someone else's? I thought about my own nature. I hate conflict. I always have. I'm the person who smooths things over, who finds the compromise, who swallows her own feelings to keep the peace. For years I had tolerated Mark's sly digs and Jess's growing distance because calling it out would have meant a fight, and I didn't want to fight. I wanted my peaceful Sunday dinners, my desire for peace. Had it created a vacuum where respect was supposed to be? I had never drawn a line in the sand with my daughter. I had never said, "No, that is not okay. You will not speak to me that way. You will not treat my love as a disposable convenience," because I was her mother. And I assumed my love came with an unspoken, lifetime guarantee of respect. I was wrong. I had taught her that my boundaries were suggestions, not rules, and she had married a man who doesn't believe in rules at all. This realization didn't absolve them. What they were doing was monstrous, but it clarified things. The soft, accommodating Carolyn who hated conflict, that was the woman they were trying to put in a home. That was the woman they thought would sign the papers and disappear quietly. To fight them, I couldn't be her anymore. The wave of loneliness that washed over me was immense. I was completely out of my depth. Mark was a shark who dealt in contracts and loopholes. I couldn't fight him with hurt feelings. I needed a plan. I needed an ally. I wandered into Robert's old study, the one room I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. I ran my hand over his leather desk chair, desperately wishing I could ask his advice. My eyes fell on a silver-framed photograph on his desk. It was of him and his best friend, Arthur Vance, on a fishing trip 20 years ago, both of them grinning like idiots and holding up a ridiculously small fish. Arthur Vance, a retired CPA, sharp as a tack and with a temperament like a grumpy bulldog. Robert had always said, "If you ever need someone to fight for you, you call Arthur. He's the most honest, cantankerous man I know, and he loves a good battle." A flicker of hope, the first I'd felt in weeks, ignited in my chest. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my old, worn address book. I flipped through the pages until I found the letter V. His number was still there, written in Robert's familiar scrawl. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding, and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice a gruff, gravelly bark. "Vance." I took a deep breath. The voice that came out of my mouth was not the wavering, heartbroken whisper of the woman I had been that morning. It was steady. It was determined. It was the voice of a woman who had just found her footing on the edge of a cliff. "Arthur? It's Carolyn Thompson, Robert's wife." I paused, then said the words that would change everything. "I need your help. I'm in terrible trouble." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, so quiet I thought for a second he might have hung up. Then his voice came back, no longer a gruff bark, but a low, serious growl. "Carolyn, don't say another word over the phone. Don't sign anything. Don't reply to any of their texts. If they show up, don't let them in. I'll be at your house tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Sharp. Lock your doors." He hung up. Just like that. No questions, no platitudes, just a plan. I stood there in the quiet of Robert's study, the phone still pressed to my ear, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel completely alone. A single tear of pure, unadulterated relief rolled down my cheek. I had an ally. The thought was a shield. That night, I actually slept. It wasn't a deep sleep, but it was a reprieve from the frantic, circular thoughts that had been plaguing me. I woke up with the sun, made a pot of coffee, and waited. At precisely 8:59 a.m., a sensible, decade-old sedan pulled into my driveway. Arthur Vance looked exactly as I remembered, only more so. He was a compact man with a full head of unruly white hair and eyes as sharp and blue as ice chips behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a slightly rumpled tweed jacket, carrying a worn leather briefcase in one hand and a large thermos in the other. He wasn't a knight in shining armor. He was a retired CPA ready to conduct an audit, which was infinitely more comforting. "Carolyn," he said, giving me a firm, quick nod as I opened the door. "Smells like coffee. Good." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd felt so helpless and alone just days before. He unscrewed the top of his thermos and poured 2 cups of coffee so black and strong it could have stripped paint. He didn't waste time with small talk. He just looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering, and said, "All right, tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." And so I did. I told him everything. I told him about the Sunday dinner and Mark's chilling comment about my house being a dormant asset. Arthur just grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. "The boy's a damn fool. And an amateur. At least use the proper term. Under-leveraged real estate asset." The sarcasm was so bitter it almost made me smile. I told him about the intervention, the glossy brochure, and their plan to move in. He shook his head slowly. Classic elder abuse playbook. Chapter 1, Isolate and Demoralize. I steeled myself and told him about Saturday, about Jess coming over to pack my memories into boxes, and then I told him about the jewelry box. As I described my mother's silver locket and Robert's wedding band being zipped away in my daughter's purse, Arthur's gruff facade finally cracked. He slammed his fist down on my solid oak table, making the coffee cups jump. "That son of a bitch!" he snarled, his voice a low rumble of fury. "He let that little weasel do that? Robert would have put him through a wall." Hearing him say it, hearing that raw, unfiltered rage on my behalf, was the most profound validation I could have imagined. He saw it. He saw the cruelty for exactly what it was. He didn't try to soften it or make excuses for Jess. He saw the violation. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "Robert never trusted him, you know. He told me once, after their engagement party, said Mark had $signs for eyeballs and was more in love with the idea of our family's stability than he was with our daughter." The confirmation was a small, cold comfort. Robert had seen it too. After I finished, Arthur sat back, taking a long swallow of coffee. He was no longer just an angry friend. The sharp, analytical mind of the CPA had taken over. "Okay," he said, his voice all business. "Crying time is over. Now we fight." They think they're dealing with a confused, grieving widow who they can bully into signing a few papers. They're about to find out they're dealing with Robert Thompson's wife. And Robert Thompson's bulldog. First things first, we need a full financial picture. Robert was meticulous, but he was private, even with me. He kept all his important papers here, right? "Yes," I said, my voice gaining strength. "In his study." I led him down the hall to the one room that had felt like both a sanctuary and a tomb. Arthur stood in the doorway for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the floor to ceiling bookshelves, the heavy desk, the leather armchairs. It wasn't a sentimental look. He was assessing the room like a general surveying a battlefield. He finally stepped inside, setting his briefcase down with a determined thud. "All right, Carolyn," he said, turning to me with the first real smile I'd seen from him. It was a grim, fierce thing. "Let's go digging. Somewhere in this room, I'll bet you $1 Robert left you a weapon. We just have to find it." Arthur was as good as his word. He didn't just offer moral support. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. We spent the next 2 hours in a cloud of dust, methodically going through every drawer, every folder, every box in Robert's study. We found exactly what you'd expect to find in a well-organized man's office: old tax returns, paid-off mortgage documents, bank statements for the accounts I knew about. It was all solid, responsible, and completely useless. There was no weapon. There was nothing. My brief flicker of hope began to dim. "Maybe there's nothing to find, Arthur," I said, the exhaustion seeping back into my bones. Maybe Robert was just what he seemed, a simple, careful man. Arthur didn't answer. He was standing in front of the large, built-in mahogany bookshelf that took up the entire back wall, his head cocked to one side. He ran a hand over a section of decorative molding near the bottom. "Robert was a careful man, all right," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "But he was a terrible carpenter." He squinted. "Look here. This piece of trim. The wood grain is just a fraction off, and there's no dust in the seam." I came closer. He was right. It was a detail so small, so insignificant, I'd looked at it for years and never once noticed. Arthur pressed his thumb firmly into the center of the molding. There was a soft, satisfying click, and an entire section of the bookshelf, books and all, swung silently inward, revealing a dark, cavernous space behind it. My heart leaped into my throat. Tucked away in the back of the compartment was a single, heavy, handsome leather briefcase. It looked like something a banker would carry, and it was fastened with 2 gleaming brass locks. "Well, I'll be," Arthur breathed, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You sly old dog, Robert." The briefcase was locked, of course. For the next 20 minutes, we were on a frantic treasure hunt for the key. We checked every clever hiding spot we could think of, but it was a memory that finally solved it. I remembered a conversation from years ago, laughing with Robert about a spy movie. He'd said the best place to hide something is in plain sight, somewhere tied to a memory no one else would understand. I walked out of the study and into our bedroom. On the nightstand was a worn, dog-eared book of poetry I'd given him when we were first dating. I picked it up, and its pages fell open to a section that had been hollowed out. And there, nestled in the carved-out pages, was a small, ornate brass key. We carried the briefcase to the desk and, with trembling hands, I unlocked it. The lid opened with a soft, expensive sigh. Inside, there was no mess, no jumble of papers. It was a masterpiece of organization. A series of leather-bound portfolios sat in perfect order, each one labeled with neat, embossed gold lettering. On the very top was a thick, cream-colored envelope with 2 words written in my husband's familiar, elegant script. "For my Carolyn. Read that later," Arthur said gently, his voice thick with emotion. Let's see what he was protecting. He lifted the first portfolio. The cover read, "The Robert Thompson Trust." "My God," Arthur whispered, his professional composure melting away into pure astonishment as he opened it. "This isn't just a will, Carolyn. It's an ironclad trust, established 10 years ago. And you are the sole trustee and beneficiary." For the next hour, Arthur read through the documents, his murmurs of disbelief growing with every page he turned. He explained it to me in simple terms, his voice filled with a kind of reverence. Robert, my quiet, unassuming husband, had apparently been a brilliant and secretive investor for decades. There were stock portfolios in tech companies he must have bought into in the 90s. There were deeds to 2 small apartment buildings in a neighboring county that I never knew existed. The numbers Arthur was reading were staggering, life-altering. I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting on its axis. But the final document was the one that stopped my heart. Arthur pulled out a thick file labeled King Street Plaza, Commercial Property. He scanned the first page, a summary of the property's holdings. Then he froze. He took off his glasses, polished them with his handkerchief, and put them back on, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Carolyn," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are the tenants in this building?" He slowly turned the page to show me the official tenant roster. And there, on line 3, it was typed in neat, black ink. Suite 201. Miller Financial Group. I stared at the name, my mind refusing to process it. Arthur tapped the paper with his finger. That's Mark's firm, isn't it?" he asked, his voice full of dawning, terrible glee. "He pays rent here, to this holding company." He flipped back to the first page of the portfolio. "A holding company that is wholly owned by the Robert Thompson Trust." My head was spinning. The room felt like it was swaying. I owned it. The building where he sat in his fancy office, condescending to his clients and planning my future in a retirement home. The foundation of his entire arrogant little empire. I owned it all. I had to sit down. My hand went to my chest as I sank into Robert's desk chair, the worn leather groaning under my weight. I stared at the tenant roster, at the name Miller Financial Group, and a dizzying, hysterical laugh escaped my lips. It was the sound of a woman whose world had been turned inside out, shaken violently, and then set back down in a landscape she no longer recognized. The irony was so thick, so poetic, it was almost cruel. The man who had called my home a dormant asset had been paying rent on his own asset to me for years, completely unaware. Arthur let me have my moment. He walked to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water, his usual gruffness replaced by a quiet, steady calm. "Breathe, Carolyn," he said, placing the glass in my trembling hand. "Let's look at this not as a miracle, but as a balance sheet. And as of this moment, you hold all the assets." His practical words cut through my shock. He was right. This wasn't the time for hysterics. This was the time for accounting. He gestured to the thick, cream-colored envelope I had set aside, the one addressed to me in Robert's hand. "Before we do anything else," he said softly, "I think you need to read that. I think Robert has a few things to say to you." With a deep breath, I broke the seal. The letter inside was several pages long, written on his personal stationery. The words were not those of a financial wizard, but of a loving, worried husband. "My dearest Carolyn," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened and I am gone, but it also means you have found what I left for you. Forgive me for the secrecy, my love, but I wanted to arm you without alarming you." He went on to explain his investments, but the most important part of the letter was about Mark. "I never trusted him," Robert wrote. "I saw a hunger in him that had nothing to do with his love for Jessica. It was a hunger for status, for the life he thought our name could provide. I saw how he looked at you, at our home not with affection, but with a cold, calculating assessment. I hoped I was wrong, but in case I wasn't, I arranged our affairs this way. This money, this power, it is not a gift. It is a shield. It is a sword. If they treat you with the love and respect you deserve, it will ensure your comfort for the rest of your days. But if they ever try to hurt you, if they ever try to cast you aside, you use it. Do not hesitate. You are the strongest woman I have ever known, even if you've forgotten it. Fight for yourself. Fight for the life we built." By the time I finished reading, the tears streaming down my face were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude and fierce, unrelenting purpose. The letter was a posthumous blessing. It was Robert, from beyond the grave, giving me his permission to be ruthless. My last shred of doubt, my last ounce of maternal guilt about fighting my own daughter, vanished. I wiped my eyes, folded the letter, and placed it on the desk. I looked at Arthur. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "What's our plan?" A grim smile touched his lips. "That's Robert Thompson's wife." For the next 3 hours, my late husband's study became a war room. Arthur, in his element, spread the contents of the briefcase across the mahogany desk, turning my grief-stricken sanctuary into a strategic command center. He explained every document, every share certificate, every deed, translating the dense legalese into plain, powerful English. The picture that emerged was one of overwhelming leverage. "Here," he said, tapping a finger on the lease agreement for Suite 201 of the King Street Plaza. Article 12, subsection B. Tenant agrees to conduct business in a manner that will not bring disrepute upon the property or its ownership. Trying to defraud your landlord's widow and have her committed to a home? I'd say that qualifies as disrepute, wouldn't you? He found more. Robert had also owned a significant block of shares in the national wealth management firm that Mark's business was franchised under. This doesn't give you firing power, Arthur explained, but it gives you a very loud voice at the annual shareholders' meeting, and it gives you the right to formally request an ethics investigation into one of their franchisees. The plan we formulated was brutally simple. It was a corporate takeover applied to a family crisis. We wouldn't plead or argue. We would act. Arthur sat at Robert's desk, pulled out his own sleek, modern laptop, a stark contrast to the old-fashioned room, and began to type. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He pulled up legal templates, inserting names, dates, and account numbers from the trust documents. An hour later, he swiveled the laptop around. On the screen was a formal, terrifyingly official document, Notice of Lease Termination. He printed it. The quiet hum of the printer was the only sound in the room. He placed the crisp, warm paper on the desk in front of me, next to a heavy, black fountain pen, Robert's pen. "This is the first shot," Arthur said quietly. "Once you sign this, there's no going back." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy and powerful in my hand. I thought of Mark's condescending smile. I thought of my daughter's vacant eyes. I thought of my mother's locket, zipped away in a purse. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, Carolyn Reed Thompson, on the line at the bottom. The power of the pen. It was real. Arthur folded the notice and slid it into a clean, white envelope. We had a plan. We had the evidence. And now, we had our first weapon, armed and ready. All we had to do was wait for Mark to walk back into my house, expecting a lamb. He was about to meet the lion Robert had armed. The 2 days that followed our discovery were the strangest of my life. The storm of emotion inside me had passed, leaving behind a profound and unnerving calm. The house was no longer a tomb or a territory to be defended. It was a fortress. Arthur and I spent the time preparing. He made a few discreet calls to a corporate lawyer he'd known for 30 years, confirming legal precedents and verifying the ironclad nature of Robert's trust. We laid out our documents on the dining room table like battle plans. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard readiness. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a hunter, waiting patiently for the prey to wander into my sights. On Thursday afternoon, the call came. It was Mark. His voice was brisk, devoid of any real warmth. "Carolyn, just a heads up. Jess and I will be stopping by around 4 o'clock to finalize the paperwork," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an announcement. "I'm bringing a notary with us, just to make things efficient and official." Efficient. That word again. He thought he was coming to streamline my eviction. "That will be fine, Mark," I said, my voice perfectly even. "We'll be expecting you." The "we" hung in the air for a moment, but he was too arrogant to question it. He just said, "Good," and hung up. At 3:55 p.m., I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the side table. Across from me, in Robert's chair, sat Arthur. He wasn't reading the paper or looking at his phone. He was just sitting, his hands resting on his knees, a silent, imposing figure of support. The crisp, white envelope containing the eviction notice lay on the table beside me. When the doorbell rang at 4 o'clock on the dot, I felt no fear, only a grim, electric sense of anticipation. I opened the door to find them on my porch. Mark, looking triumphant in a sharp suit. Jess, looking pale and drawn, avoiding my eyes as usual. And behind them, a nervous-looking woman in her 50s, clutching a briefcase, the notary. "Carolyn," Mark said, striding into the room as if he already owned it. "Good. Glad to see you're ready to be sensible about this." His eyes then fell on Arthur, and he stopped short. His confident smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tightening. "Who is this?" Before I could speak, Arthur answered, his voice calm and level, without getting up from his chair. "Arthur Vance. I'm an old friend of the family, here as an advisor." Mark's eyes narrowed. He clearly didn't like this wrinkle, this unexpected variable in his carefully laid plan, but his ego wouldn't let him show it. He recovered with a dismissive wave of his hand. Right. Well, as this is a private family matter, I've asked him to be here, I said, my voice cutting through his. It was the first time I'd interrupted him, and the effect was immediate. He, Jess, and even the notary looked at me. I had their full attention. Mark cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. He opened his own briefcase and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, placing them on the coffee table with a thud of finality. Carolyn, we are so glad you've come to see that this is for the best. It's the most responsible decision for everyone. This paperwork just makes it all official, the transfer of the deed, the power of attorney for your medical care. It's all standard stuff to ensure you're looked after. He was talking to me as if I were a simple-minded child, his voice slow and patronizing. He squared the papers, pushed them toward me, and placed a pen on top. The notary, taking her cue, opened her own briefcase and pulled out her official stamp. This was it, the moment of his victory. He leaned back, a smug, satisfied look on his face. I let the silence stretch for a beat. I looked at the papers he'd pushed in front of me, then I looked at his triumphant face. I didn't touch his documents. I didn't touch his pen. Instead, I reached for the single, crisp, white envelope that lay beside my teacup. My movements were slow, deliberate. I picked it up. Mark watched, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. He thought I was stalling, perhaps about to have one last futile emotional outburst. I didn't say a word. I just leaned forward and slid the envelope across the polished surface of the coffee table. It glided silently, coming to a perfect stop directly in front of him. He stared at the plain white envelope, then back at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Jess looked from the envelope to me, her mouth slightly agape. The notary paused, her hand hovering over her stamp. "What's this?" Mark asked, the condescending smile finally gone from his face. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. "I believe that's for you, Mark," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the porcelain of the cup in my hands. "You might want to read it before we discuss my signature." For the first time since I had known him, the smug certainty in my son-in-law's eyes was replaced by a shadow of confusion. He had walked into a signing, but he was about to find out it was an execution. Mark picked up the envelope with a dismissive little sneer. He clearly expected it to contain some tear-stained, rambling letter, a final, pathetic plea from a sentimental old woman. He ripped it open with an aggressive tear, his movements full of theatrical impatience. I watched his eyes as he scanned the single page inside. I saw the flicker of confusion at the formal letterhead of the Robert Thompson Trust. I saw the brief moment of disbelief as he read the legal language of lease termination. And then I saw the sneer return, twisted this time into a look of outright contempt. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a horrible, grating sound. He tossed the paper onto the coffee table as if it were a piece of trash. "Is this a joke?" he asked, looking around the room for an audience. "Did you print this up at the library, Carolyn? It's adorable, and honestly, a little sad." He turned to the bewildered notary. "I do apologize for this delay. My mother-in-law is, well, she's been a little confused lately." He was trying to regain control, to paint me as a senile old woman playing with documents she didn't understand. He thought it was a bluff. "It's no joke, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through his condescension. I reached for the first folder in the pile next to me. "Perhaps this will clear up your confusion." I placed the next document on the table. It was a thick, professionally bound copy of the certified deed for the King Street Plaza. It was covered in official stamps and seals. Mark's laughter died in his throat. Arthur leaned forward slightly. "That's a certified copy, of course," he added, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "But feel free to check the county registrar's office. It's all public record, has been for years." Mark snatched the document. His face, which had been a mask of smug arrogance, began to crumble. As a financial advisor, he knew what a real deed looked like. He knew the weight of the seals, the language of the legal descriptions. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed pallor. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it was almost satisfying to watch. Jess, seeing his reaction, started to panic. "Mark? What is it? What's going on?" He ignored her. He was still staring at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to find a way out of the box that was rapidly closing around him. Before he could find his voice, I slid the next folder across the table. "And while you're looking at that," I said, "you should see this." It was the summary of the trust's stock portfolio. Arthur pointed to a specific line item. "As I'm sure you recognize, the trust is a significant minority shareholder in Omnicorp, the parent company of your franchise," he explained coolly. "We've already taken the liberty of drafting a letter to the board of directors. It formally requests a full ethics and franchise compliance review of your branch, citing, let's just call them, grave personal conduct concerns." That was the blow that broke him. The calm, collected manipulator vanished, replaced by a cornered, snarling animal. He shot to his feet, the papers scattering onto the floor. You knew," he screamed, his finger jabbing in my direction. "All this time, you knew. You sat here in your little house playing the poor, helpless widow, and you were sitting on all of this. You deceived us." "No, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You deceived yourselves. You saw what you wanted to see. A weak old woman you could push around. You never once bothered to see the woman your father-in-law married." The notary, realizing this had escalated far beyond a simple document signing, was discreetly packing her briefcase, her eyes wide with fear. Jess was now openly crying, looking from her raging husband to me, her mother, a woman she suddenly didn't recognize at all. Mark was spiraling, losing all control. He saw his office, his franchise, his entire carefully constructed life about to be systematically dismantled. And in his desperation, he reached for the cruelest weapon he had left. He grabbed Jess's arm, pulling her forward as if she were a prop. He looked at me, his face a twisted mask of rage and desperation. "You can't do this," he spat. "You wouldn't dare. We are your family. You wouldn't do this to your own grandchild." He paused, letting the word hang in the poisoned air, ensuring it landed with maximum impact before delivering the final venomous strike. "Jess is pregnant." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A grandchild. A baby. I stared at my daughter's tear-streaked face, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. 1,000 emotions warred inside me: shock, a flicker of joy, and then a wave of absolute disgust. He hadn't shared a miracle. He had deployed a human shield. He was holding a hostage. The word hung in the air between us. Pregnant. A word that should have been a joyous secret whispered between a mother and daughter was instead a weapon, hurled across my living room in a last, desperate act of emotional terrorism. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. A grandchild. My mind tried to grasp the miracle of it, but the ugliness of the delivery tainted it completely. I looked past Mark's snarling, triumphant face and met my daughter's eyes. My voice, when it came, was ice. "You would use your own child as a bargaining chip?" I asked him, the contempt I felt for him dripping from every syllable. He flinched, the victory draining from his expression. I then turned my full attention to my daughter, my heart breaking all over again. "A grandchild," I said softly, the words aching with a hurt that was deeper than anger. "And this is how I find out." Jess let out a choked sob, her hand still protectively on her stomach. The shame on her face was absolute. Mark, seeing his human shield had failed, that I wouldn't be swayed by his disgusting gambit, turned his fury on his wife. He grabbed her by the arm. "Are you hearing this, Jess? Your mother is trying to destroy us, to take away our future. You need to choose, right now. Is it going to be me, your husband, the father of your child? Or is it going to be her?" It was the classic ultimatum of a cornered bully. He was trying to force her back into her cage. I saw the terror in my daughter's eyes. I saw a lifetime of fear and intimidation playing out in a single, silent moment. She looked at Mark's twisted, furious face. Then she looked at me, at my quiet, unwavering stance. She looked at Arthur, a pillar of silent strength in her father's chair. And in that moment, I saw something in my daughter shift. The spell, woven over years of subtle manipulation and outright control, finally broke. "Stop it," she whispered, her voice trembling as she pulled her arm free from his grasp. "Just stop." Mark's face tightened. "What did you say to me?" "I said stop." Jess's voice was suddenly stronger, fueled by years of suppressed pain. She turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, her face a mask of utter remorse. "Mom, oh God, Mom, I am so sorry. For everything. He convinced me you were losing your mind. He told me you were a danger to yourself and that putting you in that place was the only way to protect you. He made me feel so guilty for leaving you here alone, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him because I was too scared to admit that my marriage was a lie." "Jess, you shut your mouth right now," Mark bellowed, taking a step toward her. "No!" she screamed, a sound so full of raw power it made him physically recoil. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. I am done being your puppet. I am done letting you use me to hurt the one person who has only ever loved me." She turned her back on him completely, facing him with a finality that was absolute. "I'm not choosing her over you, Mark," she said, her voice now eerily calm. "I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing my child. I don't want my baby to be raised by a man who would do this, who could be this cruel. It's over." For a moment, Mark just stood there, his mouth agape, utterly defeated. The narcissistic rage that followed was terrifying to behold. His face contorted with pure hatred. "You will regret this," he hissed, his eyes darting between the two of us. "Both of you. I will ruin you. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." He stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. The sound echoed through the room, a violent, percussive end to a chapter of our lives. The energy that had fueled Jess's defiance vanished, and she collapsed onto the sofa in a storm of ragged, gut-wrenching sobs. The poor notary, who had been a frozen spectator to the entire horrifying drama, gathered her things and scurried out the door without a word. The three of us, me, my broken daughter, and our silent guardian Arthur, were left in the wreckage. After a long while, I walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. Her sobs eventually quieted into shuddering breaths. She looked up at me, her face swollen, her eyes pleading. "Mom," she choked out, the words thick with shame. "He's going to clear out our bank accounts. I have nowhere else to go." I looked at my pregnant, homeless, soon-to-be divorced daughter, and the last of the ice around my heart melted away, leaving only a mother's profound, aching love. But things could never be the same. "You can stay here," I said quietly, my voice gentle but firm. "You can stay in your old room." Her face flooded with relief, but I held up a hand. "But listen to me, Jessica. This doesn't fix everything. This is the beginning, not the end. Earning back my trust. That's going to take a long, long time." The months that followed were a fragile, painful dance of rebuilding. Jess moved into her old bedroom, and the house was filled with the strange dichotomy of her morning sickness and the tense, quiet dinners where we navigated the minefield of our broken trust. We started going to a family therapist, a stern but fair woman who forced us to confront the ugly truths we'd both tried to ignore for years. It was grueling, soul-bearing work. Jess, stripped of Mark's influence, slowly began to find her own voice, and I began to see the daughter I thought I had lost. Mark, true to his word, was not silent. His lawyer sent a flood of threatening letters. He made good on his threat and filed a vicious, sprawling lawsuit. He accused me of undue financial influence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But his cruelest move was suing for full, sole custody of his unborn child, painting me as a manipulative villain and Jess as an unstable, brainwashed victim. The stakes had been raised. This was no longer about a house or an office lease. It was about my grandchild. The day of the hearing arrived on a cold, gray November morning. Jess, now 5 months pregnant and showing, was a bundle of nerves. "What if the judge believes him, Mom?" she whispered as I helped her with her coat. "Mark can be so convincing." "The truth is convincing, honey," I said, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. Arthur had hired the best family law attorney in Charlotte, a woman named Diane who had a reputation for being a shark. But I knew that in family court, truth could easily be twisted into a caricature of itself. The courtroom was an intimidating, sterile place. Mark was already there, sitting with his lawyer. He was dressed in a somber suit, a look of profound, victimized grief expertly arranged on his face. He looked every bit the wronged husband, desperate to save his child. His lawyer was brilliant, I'll give him that. He painted a masterful, poisonous picture for the judge. He portrayed me as a lonely, vindictive puppet master who, upon discovering a secret fortune, had decided to use it to maliciously destroy her daughter's happy marriage out of jealousy. He presented Mark's threats and manipulations as the desperate actions of a husband trying to deprogram his wife from her mother's toxic influence. It was a complete inversion of reality, but it was compelling. I felt a chill of fear as I watched the judge's impassive expression. Finally, I was called to the stand. Diane, my lawyer, was excellent, walking me through my side of the story with calm, precise questions. But as I was answering a question about the day I discovered the trust, the judge himself held up a hand, stopping the proceedings. He leaned forward, peering at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Mrs. Thompson, forgive my interruption, but I have to ask. Is your maiden name, by any chance, Reed?" A ripple of confusion went through the courtroom. I was taken aback. "Yes, Your Honor, it is," he continued, his gaze intense. "And did you, a long time ago, work as a senior court clerk here in Mecklenburg County? For a Judge Miller, back in the early 90s. My heart felt like it stopped beating. The memories, buried under 30 years of life, came rushing back. The dusty records room, the clatter of typewriters, the stern but fair Judge Miller. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, I did." The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a small, sad smile touching his lips. He looked out at the silent, baffled courtroom. "For the record," he said, his voice suddenly thick with an emotion I couldn't place, "my name is David Porter." He looked directly at me. "I was a law student then, an intern in your office. I don't know if you'd remember me, but I did." Suddenly, I saw him, not the powerful black-robed judge, but the skinny, terrified kid he had been, with a cheap suit and eyes that were always wide with panic. The one the other lawyers called Porterhouse, because he was so green. The one I always made sure got a fresh cup of coffee. "David," I whispered, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "Of course, I remember you. You were the smart one." A real, warm smile broke through his judicial solemnity. "You were the only person who thought so," he said. He then shared a story I had long forgotten. I was about to drop out. I couldn't afford the fee for the bar exam application. I had no family to help, and I was too proud to ask for a loan. "You found me in the records room, trying not to cry. You didn't just give me a pep talk." He looked at me, and his eyes were shining. "You opened your purse, took out 2 $20 bills and a 10, and pressed them into my hand. $50. It felt like $1 million. You told me, 'I have a good feeling about you, Mr. Porter. You have the makings of a great judge.' And you made me promise to pay it forward one day." Mark and his lawyer were staring, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "Objection," Mark's lawyer sputtered, scrambling to his feet. "Your Honor, this constitutes a massive conflict of interest." Judge Porter's gaze turned to him, and all the warmth was gone, replaced by cold, hard steel. "Sit down, counsel," he commanded. "There is no conflict of interest. There is, however, a 30-year-old debt of kindness that I now have the privilege of acknowledging. Let the record show that this court is well aware of Mrs. Thompson's long-standing character." He looked back at me, then at the file in front of him. His entire perception of the case had been irrevocably, seismically altered. In that moment, under the humming fluorescent lights of the courtroom, I realized my husband had left me 2 weapons, a briefcase full of power and a lifetime's worth of small, forgotten kindnesses, and I was no longer sure which one was more powerful. After the judge's revelation, the rest of the hearing was a formality, a slow-motion collapse of Mark's entire case. His lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, offered a few pathetic, half-hearted arguments, but the damage was done. The moral authority in the room had shifted entirely to my side of the aisle. Judge Porter's final ruling was swift and utterly devastating for Mark. He dismissed every single one of my son-in-law's claims, calling them frivolous, malicious, and an abuse of the court's time. He granted Jess full, sole legal and physical custody of her unborn child. He issued a 2-year restraining order, prohibiting Mark from coming within 500 feet of either me or Jess. And in a final, crushing blow, he ordered Mark to pay for all of our legal fees, citing his bad faith conduct. I watched Mark's face as the verdict was read. The mask of the grieving victim dissolved, revealing the ugly, impotent rage of a king who had just been dethroned in his own court. He was escorted out, muttering threats under his breath. A man completely and utterly defeated. Walking out of the courthouse and into the bright, cold sunshine felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. Jess, who had been holding her breath for the entire proceeding, finally let it out in a shuddering sob of pure relief. She turned and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. It wasn't the hesitant, guilty hug of the past few months. It was the hug of a daughter who had finally come home. Arthur stood beside us, a rare, genuine smile on his face, looking for all the world like a grumpy, proud grandfather. The legal battle was over, but we both knew the real work was just beginning. The ruins of our relationship had to be cleared, stone by painful stone, before we could even think about rebuilding. Our therapy sessions became our construction site. In that small, quiet office, we learned to talk again. Jess, with the therapist's gentle guidance, finally took full accountability. "I'm sorry isn't enough," she said one afternoon, her voice thick with tears. "I'm sorry I was a coward. I'm sorry I was so weak that I let him convince me my own mother's love was a burden. I let him dim your light so his could shine brighter, and I will never forgive myself for that." The therapist also turned her focus on me. "And how will you let her earn back your trust, Carolyn?" she asked. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give once. It's a choice you have to make every day." It was hard. There were days when a careless word or a distant look from Jess would send a jolt of the old fear and resentment through me. But I learned to breathe through it. I learned to see the woman she was becoming, not just the girl who had hurt me. One evening, about a month before her due date, I found her struggling to assemble a crib in the nursery, tears of frustration streaming down her face. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the instructions, sat on the floor beside her, and helped. After 10 minutes of fumbling with tiny screws, we shared our first, genuine laugh in over a year. In the quiet that followed, she asked the question that had been hanging between us. "Mom, do you think you can ever really forgive me?" I looked at my beautiful pregnant daughter, her face soft in the nursery light. "I forgive the daughter who got lost," I said honestly, "and I'm still getting to know the woman who found her way back. But I think I'm going to love her very, very much." 3 weeks later, Lily Catherine Thompson was born. She arrived in a flurry, small and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and Jess's eyes. I was there for the whole thing, holding my daughter's hand just as my own mother had held mine. The moment the nurse placed that tiny, squirming baby into Jess's arms, I felt the last of the wreckage in my heart finally wash away. Jess looked down at her daughter, her face transformed by a love so fierce it was breathtaking. Then, she looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Mom," she whispered, "would you like to hold your granddaughter?" As I took that warm, precious bundle into my arms, the smell of new life filling my senses, I finally understood. The ruins of our family hadn't just been cleared away. They had become the foundation for something new, something stronger, something built not on assumptions, but on the hard-won truths of forgiveness. And I was so grateful we had been given the chance to rebuild. The first year of Lily's life was a time of gentle, quiet healing. The house that had once echoed with tension and grief was now filled with the sweet babble of a baby, with the scent of formula and the sound of my daughter's rediscovered laughter. Jess was magnificent. She enrolled in an online paralegal program, channeling her experiences into a passion for advocacy. She was a natural, and more importantly, she was a wonderful mother, attentive, loving, and fiercely protective. Our relationship found a new, healthier rhythm, built on honesty and a shared love for the little girl who was now the center of our world. One beautiful Saturday afternoon, about a year after the court case, We were in the garden. I was tending to Robert's violets, Jess was reading on a blanket, and Lily was taking wobbly, triumphant first steps on the soft grass. It was a perfect, ordinary moment. Arthur's car pulled into the driveway, a familiar and welcome sight. He had become a fixture in our lives, a grumpy, doting honorary grandfather who came every weekend armed with pastries and legal advice. He settled into a wicker chair on the porch with his coffee, watching Lily chase a butterfly with a soft smile on his face. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, he turned to me, his expression becoming serious. "Carolyn," he said, reaching into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket, "there's one last thing, one final piece of Robert's business." He pulled out an envelope. It was the same thick, cream-colored stationery as the first letter, with my name written in Robert's hand. My heart gave a little jolt. "He gave this to me the same day he had me witness the trust documents," Arthur explained, his voice low and solemn. "He made me promise, on our 40 years of friendship." He said, "Arthur, you give this to her only when it's all over, only after she's had to fight, and after she's won. She needs to remember her own strength before she reads this." My hands trembled as I took the letter. This was the true inheritance, I realized. The first letter was a map and a set of keys. This one was the destination. I broke the seal, my eyes blurring with tears before I even began to read. "My dearest, strongest Carolyn," it began. "If you are reading this, then you have done it. You faced the storm and did not break. I am not surprised. I am, as I have always been, simply in awe of you. The money, my love, was never the real gift. It was just a tool. A crude, simple thing I left behind in case you ever needed to remind the world of the power you have always possessed. I hope, by now, you have remembered it for yourself. For 45 years I watched you. I watched you nurture a family, build a home, and face every quiet sorrow with a grace and resilience that humbled me. The world saw a gentle gardener, a kind wife, a loving mother, but I always saw the lioness. I knew that if anyone ever truly threatened our home, you would find your roar. I am so, so proud of you. Do not live in the past. Do not let this fight define you. Let it remind you of who you are. Love our daughter. Forgive her weakness, and celebrate the strength I know she inherited from you, and kiss our grandchild for me. All my love, for all of time, your Robert." I closed my eyes, pressing the letter to my chest. He had known. He hadn't just hoped I would be okay. He had known I would be strong. The trust wasn't a safety net. It was a testament. A final, profound vote of confidence from the man who knew me best. I looked up from the letter. My daughter was smiling at me, her eyes full of understanding. My granddaughter had successfully captured a dandelion and was holding it up for me to see, her face a picture of pure joy. The sun was warm on my face, and my garden was in full bloom. Mark had tried to take my home. He had tried to steal my memories and my dignity, but all he had managed to do was give me back myself. And in the end, that was a treasure far greater than any trust fund. It was the inheritance my husband truly wanted to leave me, the certain knowledge that I was, and always had been, strong enough. Thank you for following Carolyn's incredible journey. Her story began with a quiet, painful betrayal, the kind that so many people, especially women of a certain age, are expected to endure silently. But what started as a story of loss became a powerful lesson in rediscovering the strength you never knew you had. It taught me that true financial independence isn't just about money in the bank. It's about having the power to protect your peace and your dignity. It's the freedom to say, "No, you will not treat me this way," and to know that no is a complete sentence that requires no further explanation. For the privacy of those involved, some names and specific details in this story have been changed, but the feelings of being dismissed, the pain of that betrayal, and the ultimate triumph of finding my own voice are entirely real. This story is a testament to the fact that it is never, ever too late to stand up for yourself. And now, I'd really love to hear from you. This experience made me realize how often we are asked to shrink ourselves to keep the peace, especially within our own families. So my question for you is this: have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between keeping a fragile peace and protecting your own self-worth? What did you do, and what did that moment teach you? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the very thing someone else needs to read today to find their own strength. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, and always, always remember your value.